week I accompanied our son Peter out to Philadelphia to help him get settled in at his new college. And Thursday, when I was traveling home, turned out to be pretty much an all-day odyssey. First, I walked about half a mile to the train station. And then I took 3 trains to get to the airport. And I arrived with, it turns out, with ample time. So I spent a lot of time walking up and down the airport looking for a working electrical outlet where I could plug in my computer and my phones. First world problem, right? I couldn't find one. It took a long time to find one. And then later on, finally, as the passengers were boarding the plane in the early evening, I kept hoping that nobody was going to sit in the middle seat next to me. And as the plane started to fill up, it appeared that my wish was going to come true. However, just then, one of the flight attendants announced that our departure would be delayed because of a broken seatbelt in the back of the plane. And everyone began to mutter and kind of shift in their seats. And the guy across the aisle from me pointed and said, "There's an empty seat right there." And at first I was really annoyed. I was like, "Oh, God." But then I started to think about all the people around me. And we all wanted to get going. And then I saw the couple who was affected by the faulty seatbelt. They were standing in the aisle. And so when I saw them, I was like, "Get over yourself, Michelle." So I was like, "You know what?" So, hey, so I said to the flight attendant, "Hey, they can have my seat. Let them sit here, and I'll sit in the back." And the stewardess was like, "Are you sure?" And the couple looked at me like I was nuts. And the stewardess said, "You know that it's a middle seat, and it's in the very back of the plane." And I have to admit that it was really kind of an unappealing thing, but I would have done it if it had meant that we'd all get home faster. And I also would have done it because, I know how it feels to have someone refuse to give up a seat so that I could sit with my family. It's happened to me. But as it turned out, we had a happy ending, and the seatbelt was quickly fixed, and I didn't need to move from my cozy seat. But afterwards, I couldn't help wondering, are people really that selfish? Are people really so selfish that others would marvel over someone offering to make such a small sacrifice? I mean, wow. What does that say about our society? If we're going to respond that way to such a small problem, then how are we ever going to really solve the bigger problems that face us in our world today? And you should know that all these thoughts kind of were going through my head before I read the story about the 2 flights this week where people showed rage because the person in front of them reclined their seat. I mean, really? What is wrong with people? So I'm curious, if you had been in my position, in aisle seat cushy 7D with an empty seat next to you, how many of you would have offered to give up your seat and sit in the middle of the seat in the back of the plane? Just curious. Show of hands. Okay. Yeah, I thought so. You're my peeps, And better than that, you're God's peeps. And I have come to the conclusion, after thinking about this interlude on the plane, that I think hanging out with people like you makes me a better person. Now, just to be clear, it doesn't make me superior. Being a practicing Christian who hangs out with other practicing Christians does not make me superior to other people in any way. But it just makes me better than I used to be, I think. Maybe a teensy bit. Still far from perfect. But if we make each other, I think, a teensy bit better by encouraging each other and by holding each other accountable. And when I say better, what I mean is this. I mean more compassionate and more courageous in our loving and in our living. To be sure, as I follow God's call, I stumble and I bungle a lot. And there are also plenty of times when I'm kind of like Peter in today's gospel lesson, times when I plant my feet and say, "God, I really don't want to go there later, I'm always surprised. I'm surprised to find myself awash in God's amazing grace. And often that grace flows through people like you, my sisters and brothers in Christ. I'm humbled by the widow who, in spite of being steeped in grief, somehow manages to express concern for me. I'm touched by the one battling cancer who somehow summons the strength to support a friend whose spouse has Alzheimer's. And my heart is flooded with gratitude as I see so many of you set aside your own struggles for a time in order to walk with others in their struggles. That is grace. That is pure, unadulterated, embodied grace. And my friends, those are the everyday miracles in which God is powerfully present, working in us to make us better people, and working through us to bring healing and hope to the world, one person at a time. I think that's what Jesus is talking about in today's gospel lesson when he calls us to take up our cross and follow him. To you and me and to everyone who's been touched by God's amazing grace, Jesus says, you are loved. You belong to God forever. So don't be afraid to live and to love fully, even in the face of death, especially in the face of suffering, because God is there with you and for you. And when you are suffering, our God, who knows the pain and the suffering of the cross, will help you take the next step. God will help you to make it through the day. And God will help you in time to find your way across the parched and barren desert places of life. And once you've made it across and come out on the other side of the desert, wonder of wonders, you'll find that God has watered your soul with grace and caused new life to spring up. And then as compassion and courage take root and grow within you, then you'll find that gratitude begins to blossom, and it moves you to be a companion, one who shares the bread of life with others who are in need. Because after all, that's what the word companion means, right? It means one who shares bread with another. Dear friends, when we are confronted with the brokenness of our own lives and the brokenness of the world around us, it can be easy for us to feel overwhelmed. There are so many huge problems that confront us. And like Peter and the other disciples, we long for God to intervene. We want God to come down. God, why can't you just come down right now as a mighty warrior or some kind of a superhero and just make everything right now? And yet, since we know that that isn't realistic, in our weaker moments, we may turn to conventional wisdom, the wisdom of this world, which says to us, you must control or be controlled. You must conquer or be conquered. And conventional wisdom also tells us that we must even use force if necessary to protect ourselves and to advance our own interests. We see this everywhere today in our society, don't we? Don't we? Every day we hear more and more about people who are fearful and who are reaching for guns as a way of solving problems. Sooner or later, though, we're all going to discover that our illusion of control is just that. It's an illusion. It's a big lie. Because sickness and heartbreak and death are going to catch up with all of us. Control freaks or not. Those are just part of being human. They're part of living in this world. It's the truth. the saying goes, the truth hurts. But hold on, because there's good news. In our better moments, you and I know and we trust that there is a higher wisdom than conventional wisdom. And there's a higher truth that trumps the power of sin and death. And that wisdom and that truth are summed up in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus the Christ. God sent God's own Son for us at just the right time to reveal God's undying love for this whole world. When you stop and think about it, it all makes sense in a wonderfully mysterious kind of way. I mean, if Jesus had come to earth as a conquering warrior or as a superhero, how would humankind have ever come to know that God understands our suffering? And if Jesus had repaid the violence that was done to him with more violence, instead of seeking to overcome evil with love, then how would we humans ever learn that in the end, love always wins? And if Jesus hadn't been crucified and raised from the dead, then how would you and I ever come to trust that suffering and death do not get the last word? Sisters and brothers, by the power of the Spirit who bridges the gaps of time and space, Jesus the Christ is present with us here and now. He's here in the Word. He's here in the sacrament, in the bread and wine of Holy Communion. And he's here in you. He's present in this community because we are members of the church, which is the body of Christ in this time and place. Jesus is here. And today he's calling you and me to follow him in loving and healing this world that God loves so deeply. Jesus is here. He's reassuring us that we have everything we need to fight the good fight against violence and suffering, against heartbreak and self-centeredness. Gratitude and grace are the armor with which God has clothed us for battle. And courage and compassion are the weapons with which God arms us. And Jesus shows us that these are more than sufficient to overcome the persons and powers that seek to work against God's life-giving purpose. I want you to hear again the words of encouragement and advice that Paul gave to the church in Rome so long ago, because they still ring true today. Paul writes, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil by doing good." My friends, when you and I ambush others with God's amazing grace, and when we act